What's up, guys, and welcome back to Moan Inc. If you guys are new here, then what's up? My name's Erica. Heya, how you doing? For today's video, I am unbelievably excited to talk to my guest today, and that is Dr. William Farley. Now, the reason why I'm super excited is because I've been following Dr. Farley's YouTube channel, which is called Archaeology Tube, for some time now, and I just think that his work with regards to public reach of archaeology is phenomenal. I think his videos are high quality. I think that the way these discussions are had over on that channel, with everything being approached with respect and nuance, not just debunking, Graham Hancock. It's all about finding a lot of these kernels of truth in everything, whether it be Graham Hancock or video games like The Legend of Zelda or Elden Ring, things like that. I am just obsessed with these videos. And obviously, we're all in good hands because Dr. Farley is not only a PhD, but is also a professor over in the US, which means that taking any time out of your day is hugely appreciated, because today I really wanted to talk about mostly social media and pop culture regarding archaeology. It's a topic that I've really wanted to discuss for a long time, but not being an archaeologist myself, there's only so much that I can do on my own. So thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Farley, to sort of unpack this topic. But before we can get into any of that, we should probably start with your introduction and the way that you got into archaeology, because, I think a lot of people don't have access to it or don't really have normal stories getting into, whether it be ancient history or modern history or archaeology and more specific things like that. So I was wondering about your context. When did that start? When did you discover archaeology? And how did it end up with you being the person that you are today?
It's a great question. I think I have a little bit of a different journey on that than many folks in our field, because I wasn't one of these people who was sure I wanted to be an archaeologist when I was 6 years old. I didn't look at a picture book of the pyramids or something and go, yes, that's what I want to do. I didn't even really know what archaeology was until I went to college. When I graduated high school and went to college, I wanted to be a writer, maybe a journalist or a poet or something. That's what I wanted to do. That's really what I wanted to do. But I took a class in my first year, sort of one of these general education requirement classes, and that was anthropology, introduction to anthropology. It was taught by a really, really engaging, wonderful man who actually I now know quite well, who's an archaeologist, is now older, quite a bit older man. And I just was like, wow, that's sort of what I want to do. I loved history, and I was good at history in school. And but I didn't want to be stuck inside in archives and reading all the time. I loved the idea that this was a way to study history that was more material, more field oriented, that I could be outside, that I could be, camping and digging. I just thought it all sounded so fascinating. So I started taking courses in it. And then I worked for a time in cultural resource management, which in the U.S. is private archaeology firms that work for that are structured by federal laws that it has to be done. So I did that for a little while. Went back to school. I worked for a number of years for a Native American museum, the Mashantucket Pequot Museum, which is it's run by a native tribe, and it's a really amazing place. They have a research center and an archaeology staff. So that really molded the kind of archaeology that I wanted to do, and my interest in doing collaborative and sort of engaged archaeologies like that. Then I went back to grad school and to keep studying archaeology, and I got a chance to TA, sort of be a teacher's assistant in a field school and then in a classroom. And that was when I really discovered that I loved the idea of teaching. I really just loved that so much that I really wanted to do that. So against the better judgment of my advisors, I went on to a PhD program to try and become a professor, which is a very, very hard career to pursue, and was very lucky in finding a position like the one that I have, which is rare to have a position like mine that's not totally underpaid and semester to semester and all of that. And then the whole kind of, hopefully I'm not blabbing on too long about this, but the kind of stuff that most folks know me for now, if you're not in the Connecticut archaeology community, which is a pretty small space, is this sort of online stuff and making YouTube videos and being on Twitter and talking about archaeology issues in those places. That really I only got into in the last year or two, just because mostly actually during the pandemic, right, when we were all so isolated, I was trying to find ways to engage new ways, find new ways of engaging professionally and make new connections. And it's really been amazing because I've met so many archaeologists digitally, right, from all over the world. And you get so isolated in archaeology in any discipline, right, where really, there was like I joked about the Connecticut archaeology community before, but you get sort of in that little community, you make good friends. But I've met Egyptologists and archaeologists working on every continent and archaeologists from every continent, and it's been really amazing to sort of have that experience. So that was a long-winded answer, but that's my journey, I suppose.
No, that's amazing. I just have like a million questions leading off of that. So, the first one, let's go back to the start. When it comes to how you got into archaeology, did you sort of attach yourself to a period of history that you really liked with archaeology, or did you just love the study in general and being able to hop around and explore different periods?
That's a really great question. I'm not sure I've really thought about that. I know if I go into my CV and I go all the way back to the beginning, the very first entry on it was a paper I gave in my sort of senior year of undergraduate that was on Chinese metallurgy. And there was a period when I really thought I was going to go to graduate school to do Asian archaeology. That's what I was sort of interested in. I don't know why. It's just like something sort of was interesting there. But most of the archaeologists I was meeting, I was at a public university where most of the archaeologists I was meeting were folks who worked in North America, and that was where the job. It's a little bit practical, right? Because I was working in CRM and I was working for the tribe. I had all these work opportunities. So the real actual archaeology I was getting to do was local archaeology. And so I did, and I really fell in love with that and fell in love with the idea of studying the history of the landscapes where I came from, and then especially ultimately I ended up, my actual research is focused on 17th, 18th century sort of colonial period historical archaeology, and just to be able to study sort of the place where I've lived most of my life and to do local archaeology. And then pedagogically, now that I'm a teacher and I teach at a small public university that's mostly attended by students who are not from wealthy backgrounds, and they don't have like a lot of money or a lot of ability to travel, and they have jobs and they have all that stuff. The idea of being able to provide local opportunities for them to learn about archaeology is a great way to actually open up archaeology to more people who otherwise wouldn't have gotten to get into it. So it's really, yeah, there definitely were periods when I was tempted to other parts of the world, but mostly I've just sort of ended up in this place of really love to do the sort of local archaeology, the archaeology of where I am, which is cool.
Well, I think that there's a magic to being able to touch those things that are so close to you, like in the same way that being in Europe, I can get to Greece, right? It's not like a 10-hour trek or anything too expensive for me, or going to Italy. If you're to go in January, it's like a 15-pound flight. Like, it's crazy cheap. So, I can go and touch those things that I'm studying, and it makes sense for me. But being around like local archaeology of your times and your countries, regardless of where that is, who's listening, that there is that magic of connecting to your history and through the archaeology and stuff.
Yeah, and it has to be done sort of thoughtfully and carefully, because of course, whenever you're doing the archaeology of a sort of settler colonial space, which of course I am, and I'm not an indigenous person at all. I don't claim any indigenous heritage. And so there's a challenge to that, because there is something sort of remarkable about working on a site that might be 5 or 8 or 10,000 years old here in New England, in the United States. And recognizing like, wow, this is an amazing connection I'm having to this landscape that I feel powerfully connected to, but also recognizing that this is not my heritage that I'm studying, it's somebody else's, right? So there's like those are conflicting, powerful feelings to feel as an archaeologist that I just try to be really mindful of and navigate properly. And because even in the colonial period, those aren't really necessarily my ancestors either, if I'm on like kind of a settler colonial site, which is where I do most of the work, because my ancestors are honestly probably the same part of, most of my ancestors are largely from southern Italy, Ireland, right? But most of my family very much part of those communities that came to the United States en masse in the 19th and early 20th century. So those immigrant communities. So when I get to do the archaeology in, say, New Haven, the city where my university is located, it's a huge Italian American community there. And so sometimes like the layers of the site that might be like the 1920s, which most people would say, well, is that even archaeology really? Those could be really a powerful places to work, because then I really am connecting sort of with my almost immediate ancestors. So such an interesting topic to think about and navigate uncomfortably as an archaeologist. We all do, I think, when working in certain places. So
something that you said there that I do kind of want to pick at a little bit was you said 1920s, is that really archaeology? Do you find that that's like a really public misconception about a time frame and people looking at the subject in a certain way? Like, as a professor and as an expert, our little internet expert archaeologist, how do you tackle with those things, those questions coming at you?
That is actually, it's a great question. It's something I think about a lot because I obviously I'm interested in the realms of things like digital archaeology, the archaeology of social media, of media in general, of video games, right? I've made a lot of videos about that because I think that stuff is fascinating and they're hobbies of mine, then finding those intersections. And I do find that certainly there's a notion that archaeology is really only the study of the very ancient world of really deep history, which of course it's not. Some of the most powerful projects I can think of, one off the top of my head that I can imagine is archaeologists in California, on the west coast of the US, working at a place like Manzanar, which was a Japanese internment camp during World War II, and combining that with ethnographic research where they were interviewing survivors of the camps who were kids when they were there and they're now elderly, and using that to flesh out this amazing story and really bring to light so much more information about that dark history in US history and that mistreatment of a group of people. That's the archaeology of the 1940s, right? That's not all that old, but it was an incredibly powerful use of the science. And so that's like, so trying to encourage, and I do teach this in class, right? Archaeology can really be of any time period, including the much more recent past. And then of course, if we want to get kind of wild with it, we can even start to think about the archaeology of World of Warcraft servers or something, right? And get kind of nuts with the idea of now we're really talking about digital spaces and spaces of the present and the future. And, so people were doing the archaeology of Fortnite or something like that. And, which is a real project that somebody's doing. And and you really get to, disrupt a bit people's notions of what archaeology is and what it can do. And I think that's a good thing when we have a chance to do that.
Your video game videos are so fun. I literally have watched, I don't play video games, but I watch them because I learn so much from them. But I wanted to ask you because I found that in history in general, not just archaeology, but whatever time period, I find that all of the experts love to go to video games. Like they love to sort of see what video games do. Like I recently went to the Ashmolean Museum's exhibit in Oxford, which is about the Knossos site in the labyrinth. And they had a whole section on AC Odyssey because of the depictions of the labyrinth and all of that sort of stuff. What is the fascination with video games? Like, why is it, do you think, that there is so much in there that it's like, we've got to unpack this and this is a good thing to do online to get into this medium?
Great. It's good. I haven't really thought about that because it's true. Part of it is, I think, because the disciplinary framework is sort of there. So we're like 10, 15 years now into at least the existence of sort of archeo gaming as a little sub-discipline. So you just have great scholars out there, younger folks, but now not all younger folks, doing incredible actual scholarship on the intersection of video games and archaeology. Some of it might just be that. Some of it might be the nature of games as a medium, as opposed to, say, I don't know, movies or something, right? There's something about that active, the ludic play of video games, right? The idea that when you play an Assassin's Creed Odyssey or something, I haven't played any Assassin's Creed games since way back. The second one was the last one I played, which was a long time ago now. I'm turning into an elder. I'm an elder millennial and I'm getting older. But let's say, AC Odyssey or something like that, right? Those games you're not just seeing those places, you are being put into those places. So you're actually navigating them and speaking to people and doing things and performing violence most of the time in those spaces. So there's something quite evocative about that, maybe. This is, just theorizing. Excuse me. So I should turn off my email notifications. There's something sort of evocative about that experience that maybe draws people in that want to talk about it. They're also and this is just a fact, like sort of a industry fact, the video games are like the biggest media industry. They make more money than movies, than books, than music, than all these other things. If those numbers are still true, that was the statistic I last saw a couple of years ago. So they're just huge. They impact almost everybody. And not everybody's buying a PlayStation 5 and playing Assassin's Creed. Some people are playing, the New York Times crossword on their phone, but they are still interacting with games in an interesting way, and it allows us to think about it. So such a good question that I haven't really thought that really about before. That's the best I can do off the fly. But it is a good question, right? There is that fascination. Maybe it's those things. Maybe it's something else. So leave a comment. Got some ideas, folks. So yeah,
yeah, let us know in the comments if you guys have any other theories as to why even video games are getting obsessed with doing these older sites, like just these historical video games as well. Like I found it fascinating from the outside because I'm not a video gamer at all. But from the outside, like just new games coming out that are dealing with different periods of history, and which makes, more experts want to get into them and be like, oh, let's break this down kind of thing. And I'm like, where is this coming from? And why is this thing coming out all of a sudden?
It has for a long time been just a really common thing for games to do, to set them in a historical period for probably forever, probably going all the way back to the beginning, but certainly since video games started sort of attempting to achieve some level of visual reality or something. We've seen games that are like, all right, we're going to set this in the Renaissance. We're going to set this in ancient Rome, right? There's certainly certain periods that get a lot more attention than others, right? So the Vikings, whatever that means, we're going to set sort of things in that. But that has always been something that games have done. So where obviously, certainly there are movies that are about historical periods, there are historical dramas and historical fictions, but video games, it's just really and a lot of the best video games play around with the idea of history and placing themselves within a period of history, or they make allusions to periods of history, right? So total fantasy games also, some great videos about one of the best video games ever, which is probably Fallout New Vegas, which is like a futuristic, post-apocalyptic Mad Maxy sort of a story, but in it there's like this emerging, the sort of bad guy civilization are have framed themselves after ancient Rome. So there's this idea of a future group that's like misreading texts about ancient Rome to cosplay as Roman emperors and do the most horrible things that Rome did. That's like a fascinating interplay of so many different aspects of history and archaeology and games and media literacy and so much going on there. And it makes for an excellent narrative. So maybe it's just that. I am going to make more of these video games. If anybody's following my channel, I've done more kind of general archaeology stuff recently. I am going to make more of those video game ones. Those videos are a lot harder to make. They take like way more time and effort. So I haven't had a chance to recently, but there is more coming, I promise. So
well, your general archaeology videos are also commenting on pop culture, which is very important. So let's clarify that, because I've enjoyed them and I've, again, learned a lot from them because I'm not an archaeologist at all. I do literature stuff and that's where I'm very comfortable. So, I mean, I've learned all these like random terms from your videos as well that I'm like, what is that? Make a note of that again.
But it does make the ways that there's a lot of great people on YouTube, and I'm interested in that too. The use of these mediums to talk about archaeology is a broader thing I'm really interested in, sort of in a scholarly way, in a pedagogical way. And there's people doing very different things with that space. So there are folks in sort of making archeo gaming content that is very scholarly, like that's really very much saying, how can we talk about how people interplay with technology, very theoretical. How can we start to think about how we can use archaeological methods in video games to understand how they create history? I've always been more interested in them as an opportunity to teach about archaeology through a medium that's a connection point for other people. So mostly my videos have been, exactly, like I'll have a video about, I want to teach people what preservation is and how it works. I could just dryly describe that, and some people will listen because they're weirdo nerds like us. But other people might go, oof, that's really some dry material. But, I think but you're going to do it through the frame of Uncharted. That's fun. I like those games, right? There's a connection there. So,
well, something I think is really, really great about your videos is that they're so balanced, is that you look at all sides of something and you're like, this is this and this is that. Even saying like, this is a hotly debated topic. Like you always make sure that those nuances are in there, which I think is so rare because a lot of academics, like professors, are not actually on YouTube. It's a lot of enthusiasts. So there's that discrepancy between nuance and like, here are the facts that I read in this book kind of thing, which is what I think is special about your channel. Like even your videos about ancient apocalypse was so balanced. I was so impressed by them.
It's really a hard thing to navigate. There's very strong opinions from everybody, and I appreciate so many people who have been making stuff and trying to do public education about ancient apocalypse and about pseudo archaeology or whatever we want to call it more broadly, because these things come up. Ancient apocalypse was the big thing this year, but almost every year there's something that comes up and it comes into public consciousness, and archaeologists are asked to defend themselves or to tell us what they think or whatever, and that will happen again. There'll be another one this year, I'm sure, whatever it might be, some documentary or something like that. And there's a lot, frankly there's scholarship on it, and also just strong opinions about what is the best way to do that education. Do you come in and say what you strongly believe? Because of course I have beliefs and I have strong opinions on things, and that probably does come through much of the time, but you do also have to find ways to make the things you're saying, I don't know, you have to bring people in enough that they'll at least hear you. And that can be a really hard tightrope to walk, to not endorse ideas that you think are wrong or bad, but also to invite folks in who have been misled by others, and get them in the door so that they can at least hear, right? Create that sort of soft landing that people can land on and go, okay, all right, so I watched Graham Hancock's show, I watched the Ancient Apocalypse, this seems kind of interesting, and I think history is neat. And I think this is more people than we think. I think there's a kind of sense that maybe people who are watching this are like hardcore, been reading his books for 40 years, and they're like big time fans. That show and his appearances on like Joe Rogan, put him in front of many more millions of people who probably had ever heard of him before. And a lot of those people, perhaps most of those people, are not necessarily like conspiracy theorists, right? They're people who are just, I don't know, Netflix put out this documentary, it must be true, right? And they're just watching it and kind of getting that information. And so to have some content out there where if people go, I can tell you, because you can see your metrics in YouTube, of course, my highest search terms, the way people find my channel nowadays, largely, is people searching for Graham Hancock or Ancient Apocalypse or Graham Hancock Ancient Apocalypse or Graham Hancock Debunked or something, right? They're like, those are the search terms that are bringing people to this. These are people who are watching the show and they're going, who is this guy? What is he saying? What is he thinking? Are some of these ideas sound a little bit out there? What's going on with that? And they're going over to Google and they're punching in his name. And maybe they get one of my videos that says, well, listen, here's sort of the other side of the story. But in a way that hopefully invites people in so they don't watch the first 10 seconds and go, this guy's just some academic who doesn't know anything and he doesn't get me, and they just turn the video off. Because you don't want to do that, because then you failed to actually communicate to anybody. So, but I'm still no expert in how to navigate all this. It's very difficult. It's very difficult from what I find. So,
I mean, it's always going to be difficult, but I think that that's so important, of like thinking that a lot of these people that are finding the videos are not people that have like their hard-earned opinions. Like, they're people that watch something because it was recommended to them by a streaming service or by YouTube, however it is that they find these things, and they want to learn more. And I think that that's such a key thing to hone in on, that like these people want to learn. They watch those videos about Ancient Apocalypse and then the video game videos, because they're going, is this accurate? Like, what can I actually learn from this, aside from let's just repeat the only thing that Graham Hancock said that I actually thought was really interesting. I'm just going to repeat that over and over and over again. Let's check that before I say it again.
Yeah, I didn't want to make debunking videos purely because I don't think that that's like actually that useful for it. It is important to have those, and some people making amazing debunking stuff I think is important to have that out there, just to sort of say, hey, here's the thing that he said in episode 5, and here's what the evidence suggests, and you can see those things don't align, and that's important to do. But we also have to make a sort of an emotional pitch and a connective pitch to people that says, okay, here's why it matters that there's this disagreement, and what are the things that Graham Hancock is saying in the show that have a kernel of truth in them, and how can we pull those things out and keep those, right? His sort of arguments about disciplinary rigidity and how slow science is to accept new ideas and change. Of course, there's a kernel of truth in all of that, right? Which is why it's believable. It's why you connect to it. I think he takes it to a place that's completely unreasonable, but there's an important kernel of truth in that we can actually pull that thread out and say, all right, how can we learn from that idea? He's not the first person to say that by any means. People within the archaeological community have been making those criticisms forever. So he's sort of acting like he's the first person to notice, and he's not. But he is putting that idea out there in a very broad way that other people can't do, right? None of us can get a Netflix documentary or go on Joe Rogan and have Joe be, our best buddy who's going to tell everybody that what we're saying is true. We could maybe get on Joe Rogan. That's been a huge debate in itself. But it's you're going to be in there in a hostile environment instead of having that endorsement. So I don't know. I'm thinking, I haven't thought about, believe it or not, people probably don't believe this. I don't really think about Graham Hancock at all on a day-to-day basis. He just doesn't even come into my mind. I think I've had some people who have interacted with me on Twitter, and they sort of like act like I'm like, I must be like so into this guy, and I'm like, nah, I really don't care. Like he's just a dude, but he's very popular, and he's got a big reach. I care more about the issues that he brings up and talking about those things. And, that show was an opportunity to do that. I did not expect those videos to get nearly so much attention as they did. That was very surprising, that they got a lot of views and such. Very outsized for the size of my channel, which only had like 800 people at the time subscribed. So it was a very shocking to sort of see that get thrust into that debate a little bit. All I wanted to do was sort of use it as an opportunity to teach people how radiocarbon dating works. That's really all I was trying to do.
You saw your own little segue and you were like, wait, I can totally use this. Hold on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like radiocarbon dating. Everybody I'm fascinated by that, like teaching wise and public, in the sense of public science communication. That's the places where I'm drawn. Like radiocarbon dating. Everybody's heard that term. Everybody knows that's a thing. Everybody knows that archaeologists use it to date things, right? Not everybody, right? But most people, a lot of people know about that. But do they actually know what it is and how it works and its limitations, which is really important, that it can't be used to date dinosaur bones? Like people do this all the time. They'll be like, well, dinosaurs can't be real because they used the radiocarbon dating. It was faulty on that. It's like, well, you can't. Radiocarbon dating is only accurate up to about 60,000 years old. It's nowhere near, it doesn't even come close. And it has to be used on organic materials, which we don't get with dinosaurs. It doesn't make any sense. Or we use other dating techniques for that. You're thinking of potassium argon, which, right? So it's like, who knows about this stuff unless you have the opportunity to take like an introduction to archaeology class in college, which most people do not. Most people are never going to have the chance to do that, even if they are fascinated by the subject. So it was an opportunity. I was seeing it as an opportunity to do that, to sort of say, okay, let's talk a little bit about these things that he says in the show and clarify, take them out of the pop culture definition and try and give you a little bit more of a nuanced definition of what this actually is and what it's used for. So,
well, what I think is great though now, and you also being like the perfect sort of picture person that we can use as an example for this, is how academics are getting comfortable coming online and talking. You saying like, well, Graham Hancock has this big platform because for a long period of time, like the study of those things, they're very small anyways, and they attract a lot of us who like to sit in rooms alone and read. Like we just do, or we like to be in the field, kind of talking to small groups of people, and it's like, this is where we're comfortable. We're a little bit, if not fully introverted, at least a little bit introverted. But I feel like now everyone's getting much more comfortable coming online. So hopefully when they have these docu-series, they're saying, okay, well, we can bring a Graham Hancock, but then there's this guy on YouTube that's a professor and that actually knows his shit about this. So maybe we go with him instead. There might be controversy around that again, but still at least there's a bigger pool of public facing people who are okay being on camera and sort of training themselves in it. So we don't have to rely on Graham Hancock to open this up so that we can debunk it,
The role of a place like YouTube is so important and interesting. And I've heard from, I've had a lot of conversations in the last year with folks who have been doing this sort of public archaeology for a really long time, like decades. And so there are people who have been getting documentaries made or appearing in documentaries or trying to get documentaries made on old school, like on television, right, on cable, right, and even pre-streaming stuff, right? Just these are people who have been around for decades trying to do that, and a lot of them have expressed their frustration that even now, some of these people are still working in those industries. Even now, if you go to Netflix or something, right, and you say, "Hey, I think we should make a documentary about the peopling of North America," right? Like we're just that's a topic a lot of people think is interesting, right? It's really complex. There's a lot of disagreement. There's debates. There's sites that are controversial. It's scientific discoveries. It's great, right? We could talk to indigenous people who could talk about their own oral histories and try. Right? There's so many different angles we can approach this from to say something interesting that people will be drawn to and they'll actually learn something. And the sort of executives at those places will be like, so I mean, are you going to find the Knights Templar? Like, or is there like, when's the aliens happen, right? Like that's what they want. So there's kind of like gatekeepers in those spaces, and those key gatekeepers are convinced that the only thing that's going to sell is that sort of thing. And I don't know where that comes from, but it's clearly a misconception, because there's people on YouTube who are making archaeology content who have hundreds of thousands of subscribers, millions upon millions of views, far more than I ever aspire to have, because they make a much better content than me. Most of them not traditional academics. They might have an education in archaeology, but they're not like professors or whatever. And I'm thinking of a sort of I don't know, a Stefan Milo kind of a guy, right? Who has this like amazing, his channel is incredible. Like I think his documentaries, he's making literally documentaries, and mostly about human evolution stuff. And they're so good. I'm like seething with jealousy whenever I watch one of these, because I'm like, I can never make something like that. And that's probably not true. I'm sure I could learn with time, but they're so incredible. And he's reaching a huge audience, and he's talking to experts, and his videos are really well structured, and they have good research in them. They're talking about the cutting edge research. They're amazing, right? Like that. If somebody gave that guy a show on Netflix, that show would be great, and people would watch it, and it would make money. But YouTube is a place where there's a lot of crap on YouTube, of course, but it's also a place that doesn't have those traditional gatekeepers, really, right? If you can build something, you can do it. So I'm hoping to kind of continue to do that. We've got this emerging community of people making this kind of content, and I include you in this as part of that bubble, even though I know you're not an archaeologist, right? Some of these folks are. There's people in classics, there's people in all sorts of sort of nearby fields. It's like, can we build something together that's like a community? And there's other communities in YouTube that have done this, other spaces in YouTube that have done this, where everybody kind of has each other in their videos, and they use each other as voiceovers, and it's a way of kind of building everybody up. So you create a whole community, so that when people go, I'm interested in archaeology, they don't have just one or two really good creators and 100 terrible ones. They might have 100 great creators and 100 terrible ones. So at least the playing field is evened out a little bit, right? So yeah, and but this isn't even really the question you asked, right? The going back to your original point about academics becoming more comfortable online, that there's most are still not comfortable doing that, nor do we have the time. That's part of the problem. I don't have time for it. I'm so I get it. This is a sort of a hobby I do like in my spare time, because I love it and I think it's interesting. I think it's important. But it would be great if we could make some structural changes within the industry where this sort of work was counted a bit more, right? You could use it. I'd say you could use it towards your tenure review, and that is important. But the fact of the matter is that the number of people who have the privilege of caring about tenure review, like I did, is so small that that's not really going to solve the problem, right? We actually need to think about more structural problems within the labor market, that is the archaeology labor market, and the industry of academia, but that's a whole separate issue.
But I find even academics, just a broader scope of that, Liv, who does Myths Baby, right? She doesn't have a PhD in classics, but she is an expert in mythology. She is the person to go to. And the thing that I loved about her show initially is that you go on and she's getting on people who are then becoming more comfortable because they talk to her for 2 hours or whatever. And they're like, oh, actually we talked about a lot of great things and that episode did really well. So maybe I'm going to make an Instagram post about that thing because people are interested in it. And it's sort of, everybody finding their own voice and their own way of doing it and their own, figuring out ways of talking to people about their own niche as well, which is so key. Like I have my niche and I would never go into like Liv's niche or your niche because I'm like, you guys do that. Like I would much rather direct my audience to you guys. So like you said, sort of like building that community of like, who do you go to for this little teeny tiny video about this teeny tiny like 2-year window? Oh, this person knows what they're talking about. And then they spoke here and then, you know, all of that and that little network thing.
And there's again, I keep coming back to the idea of gatekeeping, but there's some gatekeeping. You know, academia is a place that obviously we're fairly well known for gatekeeping, right? That's a pretty big. You talked about, well, that person doesn't have a PhD, but they're an expert. There are one of the things in this space, people making this kind of content, it requires a tremendous number of really difficult to get skills that are not something academics normally have, right? So I'm thinking, I think about it, not to use Stefan as an example again, right? But one of the things that's so great about his videos is they are like beautifully cut, and he knows how to do sound design, and he knows how to do cinematography, and he knows how to do good cuts, and he knows how to hire the right people to do illustrations, right? Bringing in that stuff that's not just a person standing in front of a camera talking for an hour. And and I've tried to learn some of those skills in the last year or two since I've started doing this, and they are really hard. So when you open the door and you say, yeah, we can have people, as long as they're here in good faith and they're trying to do good work, and we let those folks in to this conversation, they bring with them enormous skills and knowledges, and not just about, video creation, right? That's just the example that comes to mind, because that's obviously important if you want to make YouTube stuff. But whatever, their life experiences, they come from different places than a typical academic might, and that's going to bring new and interesting perspectives. And I say it's about good faith versus bad faith because, as I don't think that like Graham Hancock is not misinformed, right? He is saying what he believes, and he has heard all the counter evidence. He knows what the counters to his arguments are, and has chosen to ignore them because it makes him lots of money, is what I suspect. But it's and whatever, right? Or maybe he truly believes that stuff. It doesn't matter. I don't know. But he's I'm getting into dangerous territory here. But he like that's, I think that's like, there are people who are making content where I disagree with some of their conclusions, but you can tell this is a person who's working in good faith. They have read some stuff. They haven't read everything. They're trying, right? And if actually you can talk to those folks and say, hey, here's some reasonable criticism of what you're saying. And I would hope people would do the same for me, especially if I'm talking about something that I'm not an expert in. And like, we could grow, right? That's how scholarship is supposed to work, right? We treat this almost like a form of scholarship where we're giving each other feedback and opening the door for people to come in and be able to bring their perspectives and their ideas. And it could be just a good thing for everybody, I hope. So
I couldn't agree with that more. Like something I always tell people, like in the comments of my videos as well, is I'm like, you're not arguing with me if you're sitting here telling me your opinion of this thing, which is different to mine. Like you came here with respect and you just want to highlight something else that either I didn't mention or maybe I mentioned, but you think I misinterpreted. That's a good and positive thing. Like it's good to engage in that discussion and for other people as well to come in and to read that discussion, because they might agree with me, they might agree with you, they might have a third opinion. Like all of that feedback, especially in this field, especially in history, is such an important conversation. It's something that should always be happening.
Yep. So it's so much to consider, and trying to navigate this, because I have no background. Talking about expertise, right? I have no background in any of this stuff, right? So there are folks in archaeology who really have trained, like this is their scholarship is on science communication, on public outreach. They really know their stuff on that. They understand the pedagogy, they understand the stuff from educational theory, and they bring that knowledge. And because we can't all know anything. So I've got sort of, my day job, which is the archaeology of 17th and 18th century Southern New England, which is that's typical for an academic, right? Very specific, small region, small span of time. That's the thing I do. That's the thing I know really well. I can actually speak about that with some level of expertise. And how many different expertises can we all have? It's not very many, right? Because to become an expert in something takes enormous amounts of time and effort, and education and learning and reading and thinking and conversation. It just takes so much time. We can't be an expert in everything. So by opening that conversation, we can hopefully bring in people who have different sorts of expertise, and gain from that as a community. So that's the one thing about YouTube is it can create islands, as maybe I'm sure you've realized, like I have. It can feel very isolated. I've got my dumb little channel and I'm making my little content and I put it out there and the algorithm shows it to like 100 people, and that's sort of depressing, and like, oh man, look at this other person who's doing amazing stuff. But it doesn't have to be like that, right? We could actually treat it like a community and connect with each other, and I think that's already getting started. That's already starting to happen, which is good to see.
Okay, it's going to sound like a stupid question. I'm aware of the time, so I know that we will have to start wrapping it up soon. But you've said your area of expertise. It just occurred to me, people might not know like a touch point in that area. If you could give people who are listening just sort of like, okay, what is something that happened in that period that they would go, oh, okay, so Dr. Farley does this thing?
Ooh, well, it's a good question, because you might not know that, you might not even have that touchstone. So I work primarily in Connecticut, and I'm guessing this is going to be watched by somewhat an international group. So Connecticut is in New England. It's like halfway between Boston and New York City. That's whenever I've traveled in Europe and people ask me where I'm from, I'm like, it's near New York, which is not really that accurate, but it's pretty close to New York. It's part of the New York metropolitan area. So it's that's kind of where we are, right on the coast. And that part of the world has had people living in it for the oldest site in Connecticut right now is 12,500 years old. So people live there for a very long time, which is, and there are older sites than that in North America, but that's pretty far back. And that's essentially, we think, about as early as people could be there, because essentially that's like right after the glaciers move out. So at the end of the Pleistocene, end of the last ice age, glaciers move north. People basically follow them right into New England. So I work primarily in that part of the world, and over the course of that 12,000 years, obviously a lot happens. Many different people came in and out of the region, and we get all kinds of different lithic traditions, so stone tools, pottery, eventually agriculture, all the sort of stuff you'd expect in any place in the world, right? Agriculture sort of diffuses in from the Southwest, maize agriculture a little bit later, and such. And then in the 1600s, the 17th century, we get the arrival of several different European nations in the region. It's actually a very contentious place at that time, just between European settler groups. So the big one, of course, around here is England. They're English colonies, but there's also a lot of Dutch colonies, and a little farther north we have French colonies, and they all have wars with each other, and they have different alliances with different native communities. Probably the big event, conflict in Connecticut that people might have heard of, because it's one of the first serious conflicts between indigenous people and European settlers in North America, is the Pequot War, which happens in the 1630s, 1637. So that's a war between English colonies from the Massachusetts Bay Colony and the Pequot, which were the big powerhouse tribe within the region at that time. And they control the wampum trade, which is the trade of these shell beads that are really important to indigenous people, but they become like a currency for the English. That's all. There's so much. I am really boiling down a lot of information into a very short story, so I hope that's okay. So that war happens, and I mean, there's a real point in that war where the Pequot just about pushed the English back into the sea and maybe end the colonial project in Connecticut. That does not happen, and after that, Native people in Connecticut are kind of under the rule of colonial power and live on reservations, which have all the same challenges and injustices of reservations anywhere else in the United States, all the way up until the modern era. So I mentioned before, I worked for many years for the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center. So the Mashantucket Pequot are one of the recognized tribes in Connecticut, and they actually opened a casino like 30 years ago. They're one of the few that actually found financial success with that, and were able to open. One of the things they did with the money from that was they built this enormous, amazing, quite incredible museum and research center that's open to everybody. It's meant for public education, but it's also an indigenous run museum. So the stories in there are the stories of themselves, and they're telling them themselves, which is really cool, with the aid of partners in academia, archaeologists and historians and such. Really amazing kind of place. So The archaeology of New England is kind of tied up in all of that, right? That long pre-colonial period, and then the kind of craziness of the colonial period starting in the 17th century. So my dissertation was on stuff from the Pequot War, that tiny little sliver of time, 1637 or so. But I've also worked in both directions from there since and before that. So it's a lot. That was a lot. Sorry, I just gave you the whole 12,000 year history of Southern New England in 2.5 minutes. It was pretty good.
I'm thrilled with that. I have so many questions. We don't have enough time. So I'm not going to ask you any questions about all of that because some of them, immediately as they're running through my head, I'm like, these sound really stupid. So I'm probably just going to
No,
pass
no
on
such
to
thing to a
you.
question. And it's good if you want to connect. If you want, people who might be watching might not know anything about that, so they might have questions that seem stupid, but they actually are just basic, introductory, right? You got to start somewhere. You got to start at the base.
Well, that's why I suggest, you know what, guys, if you guys are watching and you're like, I too have 1,000,005 questions, drop them in the comments below and either we can come back and do another chat with them or, you know, Dr. Farley will go into the comments and answer them. Or if they're too big, you can always create your own videos. We can let you guys know what we're going to do because I have so many questions about that we just don't.
Yeah, we could certainly do this again a little bit later and have one that's just about talking about the archaeology of New England if you want. You know, like that could be an interesting, and it's not something that many people get to learn about because it's not Egypt, it's not Greece, it's not you know, it's a different part of the world, but it has just as fascinating a history, I think, in many ways.
So I'm aware of the time and obviously you have to go, so I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I love to leave all of my videos with advice for my audience. So as an archaeology professor, there are people who are watching this who saw archaeology in the title and just went, oh, that's something that I'm kind of interested in. If you could give them like not like a one-stop shop, but just sort of like one place that they can go to aside from your channel that you think is a really good place for them to start their archaeology journey, whether that be a book or another YouTube channel or something or other, like what can you tell them?
So it depends on where you are in the world, because my advice would be definitely like check out the digital stuff, right? Yeah, check out I actually have on my channel on YouTube, I have like a playlist that's like good archaeology channels, and there's like 30 or 40 of them. So check that out. That's a good place to go and sort of see other people who are making great archaeology content. Some of that is archaeo gaming stuff, some of it is straight archaeology stuff. Different people talk about different parts of the world, and that's really cool. But if you're interested in archaeology and you want to get into it, my suggestion is going to be to check out what's available locally to you, so you can try and do, because archaeology is a very material science, right? It's about touching the stuff and seeing the stuff. So again, doing it digitally is a challenge in that way. So if you have the opportunity, if you're in North America, so if you're in the United States, my suggestion would always be look for, every state pretty much has an archaeological society, the Archaeological Society of Connecticut or the Massachusetts Archaeological Society or the Archaeological Society of Virginia or whatever, right? So there's probably a community organization like that. Those places tend to be very friendly, very inviting. They probably have both academic archaeologists and just sort of hobbyists or avocational archaeologists, we sometimes call it. I know there's similar type things in the UK and elsewhere in Europe. So wherever you are in the world, I would try and find those like local organizations. They probably have digs you can participate in, sometimes for free, sometimes as a volunteer. If you can get a chance to do that, to actually go out and participate in a dig, even for a day, and see what that does for you. A lot of people will do that. They'll have like a magical experience and be like, oh my God, I moved the dirt and there was this 5,000-year-old pottery sherd and I picked it up and it changed my life, right? And some people are like, wow, that was miserable. I have sunburn. I got bitten by 8,000 bugs. I'm never doing that again, right? And you should learn that about yourself, which one of those is going to be your journey. And if you have that latter experience, it certainly doesn't mean you can't do and be interested in archaeology. Of course you can, but maybe that field part is not for you. But if you do love that sort of stuff, it's an amazing experience. So yes, go check out that playlist to find a bunch of other people on YouTube. That's a cool way to do it digitally, and support that community of creators on YouTube. But beyond that, I would say, yeah, try and find those local community organizations that are doing archaeology around you if you can, and check those out.
Actually, that was a wonderfully practical piece of advice. So thank you so much, Dr. Farley, for joining me today. I cannot express my gratitude enough. It means the world knowing that you have such a busy schedule, but you still took time out of your day to chat not only to me, but also to the viewers. And goes without saying, I cannot thank the viewers enough. All of you guys who have been engaging with this content, not only this video, but the wider channel and Dr. Farley's channel. Of course, you can find all of his links in the description below. But I appreciate you all so, so much, because it's really because of you that I get to have these conversations and I get to produce content like this and open up the community and link you guys to other incredible channels and incredible creators like Dr. Farley. So don't forget to go and subscribe to his channel. But in the meantime, I will be seeing you next time with more videos here on Moan Inc. So I'll see you guys then.